for over 17 years has investigated and exposed political conspiracies worldwide. World Watchers International originates at KLRB, Carmel, California. Here's Mae.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's broadcast number 542, and it's April the 25th, 1982. I saw a picture in the newspaper this week of the comedian, the taxi star Andy Kaufman, being held upside down by the wrestler that took him seriously and decided to pounce his head on the floor and it's called the pile driver. They have his head between the boxer's, the wrestler's legs, and his feet are in the air, and he's ready to bang his head on the floor, and he had a severe spinal injury from it. And when Kaufman woke up from this injury, he said that he thought that they were just kidding around, that the wrestler was just hamming it up for the crowd, but he thought it was show business until he ended up with a severe spinal injury. When I saw that, I thought of the mountains of articles I have that come out every week, the important things that are in the news, and how the average American person is really playing pile driver. I think that the administration and the people in power since World War I, and certainly the period that I've studied extensively since World War II, just about have our head down between their legs, our feet in the air, and they're ready to bang our heads. And it reminded me of the situation as it is, the way that we're being turned in every aspect of our society into something that we really shouldn't become, and the injuries are going to follow later, and the inability of people to do anything but to think that it's only a game and to have so many diversions away from what's really taking place. I'm going to do a little bit about Antarctica and Argentina tonight. I have many articles that are pertinent to it, but I want to spend more time on some side effects of what's going on. In the last 2 weeks, I've discussed what would be happening and how it would come about and why, and there seems to be a shooting war this morning. They're not going to back down as of the time I came to this radio station, and I don't believe that our government is set up in any way to do anything but to favor the Argentinians. On the surface, we will look like we're appeasing the British or going along with them, and our loyalties, according to Senator Jackson or other people in the news media that you hear or read about, they verbally give their loyalties to the British, but underneath the money, the energy, the planning, the investments, all are down in South America, and Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Central America. And this is the area that our government has been pushing their energy in the last years. Part of this has to do with importing this large amount of Nazis to this country and to South America and combining their forces for the events that are just taking place right now. One of the dirtiest articles or series to come out of this so far, and there will be plenty, as there are continuously, is again the agent provocateur Jack Anderson playing a certain role. 50% of what Jack writes is good, and then because it's good and it's interesting and timely, he can come in with other things that are very insidious. And a perfect example was this week, the Jack Anderson column that made the front page of the Washington Post, that was Saturday, April the 17th, of the telephone conversation between Alexander Haig and Ronald Reagan. And it's exactly like the deep throat episode that took place 10 years ago to get Richard Nixon out of office. Keep in mind that Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan are fronts for both the CIA, the Defense Department, and organized crime, but the intelligence apparatus wants to get its muscles and tentacles totally into the White House, and with Vice President Bush, former director of the CIA, there is just one moment's throw away from having Bush as director. And so it's time to make fun of Ronald Reagan. That isn't very hard to do, but it's time to come in and undermine him as they did Richard Nixon. And the Washington Post did it with their Woodward and Bernstein hitting the areas where they get Nixon out of office but cover up all the other things and the continuous murders related to Watergate. So that Jack Anderson had a column this week where there's an April 9th telephone conversation in the Falkland Islands. It was about the Falkland Islands between Alexander Haig, who is airborne, and Ronald Reagan, who is in the Barbados. Reagan describes how he's swimming around and he has messages for Haig. But the important thing is that the front page of the Washington Post, the April 17th article, and the other excerpts from other newspaper articles referring to Jack Anderson say that this telephone conversation was intercepted, that it was a 3.5-minute conversation between these two parties, that it was directed and given to Jack Anderson, that he checked with the Secret Service and it was authentic, and then he went ahead and printed it, and the Secret Service was totally aware of it. The only problem with that was that everything Ronald Reagan said is printed, and everything Alexander Haig said is not printed. So that, again, Haig is always protected as if he's some special kind of a god, and he did work along with these Watergaters to get himself to be chief of staff at the height of Watergate when Richard Nixon was being taped, and Mr. Alex Butterfield, Haig's buddy, was there taping him and getting the President of the United States out of office. The excuse for not having Haig on the tape was that the Haig's responses are inaudible because of interference of static. Now, I don't know much about radio or electronics, but it seems really strange that two people can have a telephone conversation and only one voice is recorded and one is wiped out. So Ronald Reagan is saying, "Hello, Al. I'm glad the British fleet doesn't move very fast," because Al is on the way down to Argentina. He says, "You must have been in the air for 12 hours. Then he giggles. He says, "There's going to be an uphill struggle," meaning when you get to Argentina. "Did you get any idea as to whether the emotion that you met in your meetings goes beyond the Parliament to the people as well?" Asking, British supporting Margaret Thatcher, in addition to the business meetings, what are the people doing? And then Haig, there's a 10-second pause. Then Reagan, "It sounded as if there was not much acceptance of the multinational presence here. Are there any variants of what you think she might go for?" And then there's a Haig 13-second pause. Then Reagan says, "Incidentally, that submarine of theirs, do you think it's apt to go ahead with retribution and sink anything? Or would that be enough to vindicate them?" And then there's a pause again. And he says, "I don't ask you to speculate on the next steps. You haven't been to Buenos Aires. But in those talks, if it's helpful at all, why don't you go back on making me the bad guy and insisting on restraint if that's necessary?" So whatever they're manipulating, he says, "Go on, you can go back, make me the bad guy," because Reagan knows that he can laugh and hand out the jelly beans and be real cutesy at his press conferences and giggle and wave his hand as he gets in and out of a helicopter and have no answers that are intelligent on this thing at all. So he wants, Haig can do what he wants, and Reagan will be made out the bad guy. Then there's a 19-second pause, and he says, "Well, it's a tough uphill fight. Just let us know if there's anything at this end that we can do and be of help." And then there's another 8-second response. He said, "Had a good swim in this ocean that you're looking down on." Haig's up in the air flying over. "Oh, it was wonderful." He says, "I'll make it over and out then, unless you've got something else." Well, this is such a trite conversation, but the point is that Reagan's saying, as the President of the United States, "Well, if I have to take the brunt, go ahead and let me. You keep looking big guy." And the interesting thing, if they're going to print it at all, to get a telephone conversation that's tapped, that's delivered to the mouthpiece of the world, that's Jack Anderson, why not have a true account of what Haig said? Whatever it was Haig said, somebody protects him and burps it out. And they also talked about a skirmish, a possible skirmish. And Reagan said in the conversation, "The British will want a skirmish to save face," and Secretary of Haig reported, "The Argentinians a little more flexible than the British." And that one sentence was in there, allegedly from Haig, that the rest was blocked out. So if they could hear Al on 1 second, they could hear the other. But Reagan, the friend of Great Britain and Margaret Thatcher, I mean, really a rotten fellow, he's saying, well, the British want a little skirmish to save face, and without any understanding of just exactly what is going on. But the mentors of Haig and these various parties, one is the Council of Foreign Relations, published a book in 1975, which I just recently got, and it's about a directory of foreign nations and the city's geography, the news media, and facts about the major countries from the United Nations. And in there, it lists Argentina, and it's the second largest country in South America. Argentina owns the Falkland Islands. Now, I thought that was pretty interesting. This came out in 1975, and for all purposes, the Falklands belonged to British up to this month when Argentina went in. They may have psychologically or emotionally felt that it belonged to them down there off of Argentina. But the Council of Foreign Relations hired two professors from upstate New York to write this large book, a very big book, on various countries, and they said Falklands belonged to Argentina. So the Council of Foreign Relations with David Rockefeller, and Nelson was alive at that time, and with Haig as their protege, and Henry Kissinger, put into their history books the Falklands was Argentine to begin with. So in the tapes they say, well, Margaret wants a little skirmish to save face, and so forth. They've already decided what they're going to do. It'll be interesting to see how they worm their way in and out. The most interesting article on Antarctica was the one from the Sunday Times, New York Times, March the 14th, 1982. It's about 3,000 inhabitants that live down there, that live and work at 36 permanent stations. That book on Antarctica also, on various countries, listed Antarctica as being a country not inhabited by any person in 1975, and that's an outright lie. So you can see how the best minds of the country, if you read the directory of who's who from the Council of Foreign Relations, from the news media and the public offices and the private attorneys and government officials, their official book for geography and countries mentions that Argentina is not inhabited. The New York Times says that there's 36 permanent stations and 3,000 inhabitants in Antarctica, not Argentina, in Antarctica. And the important thing about this one article that hinges on a lot of things that I've mentioned on these broadcasts before is that it deals with the law down in Antarctica. Now, there have been several other articles and mention on the news media today, just today, about the relationship of Argentina to the Falklands to Antarctica. And right next to those islands is Antarctica. And this article says, in international law, Antarctica is a twilight zone, and it refers to a Professor Richard B. Bilder, a professor of law at the University of Wisconsin, who made some statements working for the State Department's legal office that Antarctica is the place to murder your mother-in-law because nobody would have jurisdiction over there and know what to do about the problem. What is the best place if you want to eliminate somebody and get away with it? The answer is an American station in Antarctica. What would happen if an American killed a Russian in the Australian sector? He brings up the legal questions. If Japan killed somebody over a Chilean claim down there. And this article is about the laws of life down in Antarctica that have to be studied now. And it said it goes beyond the mineral and the oil, the energy resources of Antarctica. And this is the interesting thing because we've been hearing a lot about the oil and the minerals down in that area. The problem of law in Antarctica goes beyond it. There are 3,000 scientists working down there and military people now from 12 nations, 36 permanent stations. It is a continent as large as the United States and Mexico combined. And then the article goes on to say the resolution of the legal situation is important, not only for settling potential conflicts among themselves, but also because it may provide a model for the coming age of space colonization when large numbers of human beings might live for extended periods aboard spacecrafts or the moon. Now that's the catch, and the point that I've been concerned about is that this large mass of both Antarctica and particularly the Falkland Islands, once those few hundred people are removed from there, the British people, if they leave and don't want to be there with the Spanish or the Argentinians that are already there. I say Spanish because many Nazis went down to Argentina from World War II, and many weren't back and forth from Argentina to the continent of Europe. Now, this is a large mass the size of the United States plus Mexico, and they suggested it may be a model for the coming age of space colonization when large numbers of human beings may live for extended periods down in Antarctica. Now, one of the things that I worried about 10 years ago, tonight exactly, was the use of these large airports, particularly the Dallas-Fort Worth airport that had just been built for the migration, for moving large amount of people to remove them from this country. That's before I knew about the book Alternative 3 and the plans for space stations and removing about 80% of the population of the United States because of pollution and not having to share the resources and getting them to space stations or out of sight. 10 years ago, April 25th, 1974, I had an article in the Berkeley Barb titled Is SLA Sin Q? That's Donald DeFreeze, the first black Lee Harvey Oswald. And this book was about racism, about domestic problems, about the plans to exterminate a lot of people and to use the examples such as SLA kidnapping or terrorism to get the SWAT teams ready for locating people and mass migration later. On the cover of the Berkeley Barb, I said, in the past 10 years, we have seen the murder of a president, a senator, congressman, civil rights leaders, and hundreds of other victims that are related conspiracies. The next 10 years will be bloody and fearful for the minorities in the United States. Now, it's exactly 10 years since that date, but there was a little time from 1974 until the end of the Carter administration when the House Select Committee on Assassinations was investigating murders, when the Senator Church Committee was investigating the illegal CIA, the Rockefeller Committee, the House Committee under Representative Pike. We had a stalemate there before Ronald Reagan became president. He was governor of California when I wrote this, and these people went on and moved to Washington. But I asked the question, where would we be 10 years from now? But you could push it up 4 years because there was 4 to 6 year grace with Jimmy Carter in there and the 2 years of investigation after Richard Nixon was out of office. I said the defense intelligence agencies will continue the policies of Nazis, and genocide can be made possible. 2 large airports will be utilized to move large masses of people. At that time, they were planning a huge airport at San Diego, which was scrapped after the Watergate stories broke. They planned, I wrote about the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, close to the Mexican border, the airports they had designed with extra thick runways to accommodate the giant 747 planes. The planes themselves, which have proved impractical for civilian airline use, were purchased by the military and at that time were remodeled for mass transport. Their engines are turned over every day at a cost of thousands of dollars so that they can be pressed into notice at a day's notice. And I wrote about the 12.5 million acres of California desert land stretching from the Mexican border in San Diego to the Sierra Nevada. And I've been reading in the newspaper this past week that the anti-Castro Cubans are trading in the California deserts for the revolution in this country and to defend fascism against socialism or whatever they think should be done. There are groups in this country of anti-Castro Cubans, Minutemen, and Nazis training, particularly in that desert area that I was writing about that was closed off. And I also mentioned that new $105 million hospital at Travis Air Force Base on 82 private acres, totally inaccessible to most persons, where there'll be a computerized hospital room designed to include a revolutionary one-room treatment center, according to Colonel Oliver Hood, who admitted that it was too radical at the time to explain what it was for. And I asked, what would that prison hospital would be used for? How could it be used? And 10 years ago, I was saying that Congress is purposely hurting our economy. They are losing the chance for good housing, for jobs, or education for minority. They're impounding funds, cutting off school busing, denying legal aid to the poor, and that's in the news this week. That's a big issue about a fascist bigot that Reagan has appointed to eliminate the bureau that takes care of legal aid for the poor. All steps toward equal opportunity and racial progress are being halted. Now, that's just a fraction of the article. It's a long article. And 10 years ago, I was talking about the use of these massive airports for control. Another part of that New York Times article, before I get back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the New York Times article on the possibility of preparing people in these large masses for moon and for space colony what word do I want to say? You're not living up there. You're not working up there. I guess it's, what would you call your trip to Auschwitz? I think it's just called genocide to get rid of large masses of people. It can't possibly be constructive or beautiful like Gerard O'Neill designs it at Princeton University with those floating clouds and trees. It's a place for extermination. In this New York Times article that talks about the possibility of using this large landmass down in Antarctica for getting ready to prepare for moon living or space colonies, there's a large territorial claim map that was printed in the New York Times, and it shows how Antarctica is divided. And there's a section that is unclaimed, and there's New Zealand's claim in Australia, and the McMurdo Station the United States uses, and then France's little claim, and Australia has a big piece. And then there's a hunk of that pie on the right side of Antarctica that's called Norway. And it's in that section, in the middle of that section called Norway, that Admiral Byrd saw the warm water, brown hills, green grass colony, that the issue of the Police Gazette has drawings, the one published in 1977, of where they allege that Adolf Hitler was taken to that area, marked Norway. And then above that, there's a hunk marked off on that pie in the north east corner called Argentina, that is a section that belongs to Argentina. And that's the area that Adolf Hitler has designated on it's given his name and says it's designated as the area that he surfaced and put the Nazi flags on down in 1939 when he was looking for a place in case he couldn't accomplish what he wanted. He'd have an alternate going there. So there's a section of Antarctica for Chile. There's a part for the United States. New Zealand, the McMurdo Station, as I say, is in that one little corner on the west side. But the Norway section is where the warm water bases where Admiral Byrd would have been for his first trip in 1946-47 that I mentioned that is on the programs before. And then the Argentine section is marked off, and that's where Adolf Hitler on the map of Antarctica secured his own area for himself. Now, the Police Gazette, the volume that I have, it's 50 pages, and I really must get it reprinted for those of you who want to copy it and get it to you, discusses here how the ships went from Norway when the war was just about over. There was a U-boat 530 which proceeded that was supposed to help with the escape of Hitler. The U-977 in April 1945 was sent to Norway. The superiors were ordered to go to Norway, and Admiral Donitz, Hitler's chief of the Navy, who was to take over when he was there no longer, provided the information to go to Norway. This is mentioned in the books. And then on the escape route of Hitler, and then the other page, it says, on the other hand, the U-977 left Norway May the 2nd and arrived July the 8th in the vicinity of Cape Verde Island. Why did it take 2.5 months to get up to Argentina? And the allegations are here that it went from Argentina down to the bases that Hitler had built. And then there was that Norway base that is, if Norway has this big hunk of Antarctica, it is the exact place where Admiral Byrd was in the warm water bases when he said, we have not entered World War II and we'll have to have a defense system down there. Now, in terms of those airlines that could take people down and large amounts of people moved on those 747s, which I could see this happening 10 years ago, the way the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport was designed, these huge planes and so forth. There's an article regarding the American Airlines this week. You know, they are trying to take over and have been accused of getting Braniff Airlines out of business by using the computer system and breaking them, pulling out the regular Watergate bag of dirty tricks. And the newspapers this week, one, the Oakland Tribune, says, Dirty Tricks Grand Jury, Fort Worth, Texas. A federal grand jury is investigating the alleged dirty tricks by American Airlines against nearly bankrupt Braniff International. They're claiming that there's a bitter feud between Braniff and American, rivals for control of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, American tried to crash Braniff Airline to make it bankrupt so that Pan American could take over all the South American routes. If you've been listening every week, you'll follow what I'm saying. If you haven't, let me see if I can simplify that in a moment. There's a conflict between Pan American Airline that is also broke but wants to buy Braniff Airlines. American helped Braniff get broke by playing dirty tricks on it. And by its losing money, Pan Am could take the entire South American route of Argentina and Chile and Peru and Colombia and every country except Venezuela. They'd have total control of everyone who goes in and out of the country. And by America helping Braniff get bankrupt, America would control American Airlines, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So what we have in the news this week and the weeks that preceded it was the attempt to control all the routes of South America and the attempt to control the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And those were the two areas that 10 years ago I was concerned about and writing about. Another article in the Los Angeles Times says, Americans, that's American airline tactics in Braniff battle being probed, and it again refers to the fact that they want to weaken, the allegations, they want to weaken the Braniff Airlines to monopolize the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And that if you monopolize that airport, and then the other airline has a monopoly of who goes down to South America, you are really in trouble. Now, getting back to South America and monopoly of airlines, I mentioned last week that Pan Am was referred to in the book Children of Jonestown, that they were the ones that allowed the children to be sent in batches of 10 and 20 and 40 drugs with their hands tied behind their backs. And I want to continue those lines, another section of the book Children of Jonestown, because it has to do with the identification of dead bodies and the intent. Now I'm switching from the mechanics of getting people down to Antarctica to eliminate them through these airlines, commercial airlines, through the control of these airports, and through the airplanes are built. Now, what do you do with these people? What is the intent of the administration of the United States with American citizens? Let's start with Americans. Forget everyone else. In the book, The Children of Jonestown, on page 196, this is written by Kenneth Wooden in 1981. Initially, the United States and Guyana agreed the 400 bodies would be buried in Jonestown, but the body count rose day by day. That's another issue. But it goes on with the dead Americans, they were to be removed from Jonestown. The United States military was quickly mobilized, and within several days of Dr. Mutu's arrival, and at the scene to start the grim task of removing the bodies, their first chore was to bayonet the bloated bodies to release internal gases caused by hot sun and humidity. They were kept 4 days so you couldn't tell they're black or white or male or female. Their bodies were deteriorated and rotten. Okay. The second task they had was more controversial. Although Ordell Rhodes and Stanley Clayton, members of Jonestown, returned to the compound the very first morning and wanted to help identify who the dead were, on orders from very high up, all politically sensitive papers and forms of identification were removed from the corpses. Methods of identification were removed from the corpses. Photos on the cover of Newsweek and other magazines and newspapers clearly show many of the bodies had ID tags on them. Joel Cobb and John Stone, who are now among the unidentified children, were initially positively identified. Jim Cobb told NBC News in March '79, my brother Johnny saw tags on people's bodies, but only 2 members of my family were identified, and I want to know why. Lieutenant General Gordon Summer reported it was the first time in his military career that he saw his men politicized in the U.S. Army in view of the fact that there was an order to strip the IDs that came from Robert Pastor on the staff of Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Carter's national security advisor. And it is clear the impulse was to save any possible embarrassment to the Carter administration. This action would go ahead, and they made progress. They took off the identifications, and only 6 bodies, or 7 rather, later had autopsies. Now, instead of running through a whole pile of articles I have here, maybe we should ponder what it means when Jimmy Carter's administration asked that we don't know who was down there and who was dead, stripped the identities, and a man who was 3rd in the CIA is going to replace Bobby Inman as a deputy director of the CIA. He was in charge of counter operations, counterintelligence, and the Jonestown. And now he's working up to be deputy director of the CIA. I'll take a 1-minute break, and we'll go on to some more on mass movement of people and not knowing who they are. Why can't we know? And how many people are going to be sent down to Falklands or Antarctica? Is it going to go into the millions?
You're listening to World Watchers International over FM 102 KLRB, and now here's Mae with Part 2.
Okay, we'll get back to some of these very serious matters, and they have to do with Antarctica and Falklands and what's going on in Argentina and South America, and to American citizens, particularly how our government is covering up and is collusion with those people with experiments and murder and mass murder of American citizens. I had called Joe Holzinger's office. He was the aide to Leo Ryan, the member of Congress who was killed in Guyana. Within days of the murders down in Guyana, went to the office, made some tape recordings there with the secretary, and later Joe Holzinger came to my home, and I was the first person, I believe, in the United States to call attention to those name tags on those people. The minute I got Time magazine and Newsweek magazine, and you can get those Jonestown issues and look at your library, December the 4th, 1978. And I have the page numbers for Newsweek, but Time magazine, if you find the same date, it's in your library. You'll see them there. On the cover of the magazine, where there are people lying on the magazine, on the right leg of a girl in green pants, there is a leg tag. On the arm of a fifth body, you see an arm tag. On the back of the pants, somebody is labeled with a marker on the back. This is on the cover. On page 41, there's a left leg next to that cyanide vat with a marker, a tag. Now keep in mind, no person had gotten into the compound. Time and Newsweek came and swooped down and took photographs. The people who had been there to murder them, inject them, shoot them, pile them, and to leave over 100 assassins could do the job and are still missing. Some of them went to the Barbados. They probably stayed with Claudette Colbert, where Ronald Reagan was a few weeks ago. Goodness knows what they were doing. These people are out loose at the present time. But look at those bodies that were left, that weren't covered over, and you see the left arm of a woman next to a bucket on page 41. On page 43, there's the left leg of a person, and on the right, they have an orange shirt on. You'll see a tag. And the left arm, there's a seventh body up. It's covered with a blue blanket. There's a tag. And the left arm of another person at the back edge of the picture, the pink blanket. I got a letter. I mentioned those tags on this program immediately and talked about Jonestown. I called KGO and tried to get that point across. And I got a letter from a fellow serving time in prison, and he wrote to me and he said, "Dear May, I happened to catch you on Bob Trevor's show on KGO and enjoyed it immensely, particularly interested in Jim Jones and the CIA connections and the involvement in mind control. I was a prisoner in Vacaville and recall a questionable project dealing with giving people electroshock and wearing strange plastic wrist tags with either paper or liquid inside which change colors." He said, "I'm in a federal prison right now." He said, "I have a good friend of mine, a professional soldier of fortune, a mercenary who gave me information about South America, Belize, that was under British control at the time, until this year, Guyana, Honduras. He works with an influential group of California businessmen with multinational interests, and he was interested in automatic weapons and so forth, and there's a lot of activity of the CIA going down there." He wrote this to me from a prison in California. Now, the implications of sending people to these islands, to using these airports, to tying people behind their backs, to dragging them to using commercial airlines and using the Army as a politicized venture goes so far that you remember the time when it was 1978, December 1978, on this program, way back, number 368, I talked about smuggling witnesses into Guyana. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was investigating the case of Martin Luther King, and Mark Lane was sitting at the table at the time representing a woman, Grace Stevens, who was a witness in the rooming house where James Earl Ray was supposed to have stayed. He stayed there, and she claimed that it wasn't the same person that left there that had shot Martin Luther King, and she had information on that, and they put her immediately into a mental hospital. And when the investigation came out many years later, the investigation began. Mark Lane checked her out. They gave her to Mark Lane as a ward from Tennessee to Mark Lane, the attorney, and he brought to Orange County, California. And then there was a memo discovered by Nicholas Harrock. He wrote about it in the New York Times, December 8th, 1978. A memorandum was found in the file of Jim Jones saying, Jim, I got a message here. You wanted me to tell Mark Lane he should look into alternative means of getting Grace Walden to Guyana because the CIA might try to stop her from entering the country. Mark should try to get her another passport. And he refers to a woman who died, Maxine Sweeney, who was killed in a Jonestown encounter car accident, and they were going to give her, Grace Walden, the passport of Maxine Sweeney. And the letter from Jim Jones says the drawback of this would be, of course, if a traitor were to look at the immigration list, we would be caught in a minute. The good point of this would be we wouldn't run the risk of getting caught by a passport off on the white market. That means trading passports. So the idea of having all those passports down there photographed in Time and Newsweek and destroying the people and not having any identity of who they were, most of them, was because I know many of the people didn't match the names, and how many witnesses or persons were housed away in that area that were primary to cases in this country that could be experimented on, shipped off. And if this happens, where does it stop? How far does it go? And as I say, the new deputy director of the CIA is going to be a fellow who had to be a part of the entire CIA Jonestown Jimmy Carter operation, military operation. And Mr. Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, not Jones, the one who ordered the military to destroy the identification. Brzezinski was the gentleman who selected Pope John Paul II, along with Jimmy Carter, to become the Pope, the Polish Pope, who's currently in the Vatican, and that Pope worked for Solvay Chemical, which was IG Farben at Auschwitz. So exterminations, mass exterminations, do not offend this Pope very much. It was a very much part of his life. He went on to become a Pope. He was working for Solvay Chemical when all these murders, mass murders, were going on. And he was put into the Vatican by the influence of the Americans, Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski, on the people in Rome. He was put into the Vatican, and now Brzezinski, his counterpart, is allowing the cover-up, ordering the cover-up, and the politicization of the American army in a question of mass murder of American citizens. Now, if you think that you can sleep with this and it's never going to touch you, you are ready for one of those headbangers. Believe me, you're being held up by the heels, your head's between their legs, and you're ready to drop. And that's exactly what's happening if we don't do something to stop this insanity and open up the Jonestown again. And the role of Brzezinski and the federal government, the military, and the CIA were all in deep trouble. And connected to the article I wrote on the airports and the medical control and the military control combining like they did, say, with Jonestown or down in Antarctica with these secrecies, there was an article in the New York Times. This was Wednesday, April of 21st, 1982, sent to me by one of my favorite world watchers. I didn't see it in my edition. Electronic data gets an Army contract. This is the New York Times. The Army announced yesterday, and this was this past week, it had awarded the electronic data systems, as against IBM that competed, a 10-year contract to instill and operate what will be the government's biggest data processing company. Now, this is going to be an organization called Viable, V-I-A-B-L-E, and it will connect every Army post in the United States, 42 Army posts. Now, the offices will be in Atlanta, Georgia, where so much of this counterintelligence and the Marshall Plan, the Garden Plot, and I give endless relationships of Atlanta, Georgia, and Jimmy Carter and Reverend Moon and Lockheed. There's a lot going on in Atlanta, Georgia. That's one of the bases. That's where the Germ Control Center is, in Atlanta, Georgia. The other's in Killeen, Texas. Another base is Monterey, California. Now, wouldn't you think that a corporation that gets this kind of a contract for $454 million to connect every Army base in the United States, this would be in our Monterey Herald? No, it comes out of the New York Times. If you live here in Monterey, you just don't happen to know it. And then the bottom line is the worst part. Electronic Data's chairman and majority stockholder, H. Ross Perot, has been in the spotlight for such actions as an unsuccessful effort to fly supplies to American prisoners in Vietnam. Ross Perot has been behind every kind of a counterintelligence operation from A to Z. But he's more than that. He is the computer system for Blue Cross for the hospital plans in the United States. Ross Perot links into the medical to those hospitals and the records that are in all the hospitals. So he has the information on health systems, on people who are sick, requests for Blue Cross. They are instrumental in major cities. Ross Perot is the medical computer system. So when you combine the medical computer system with the Army system, where you put in all the military bases into this huge operation viable that connects all the major military bases throughout the United States, multi-million-dollar, $450 computer, the Army Computer System Command, they said, was obsolete. So they will now employ 700 workers, and I would like to tell the people in Monterey that that is one of the things happening in our area. Maybe our local papers would be nice and tell us about it in a day or two. Let's see. And finally, on that subject of Antarctica, before I get to some other articles very quickly, a James Bernard McNally, 65 years old, died this week. None of us knew who he is, but the obituaries are getting more interesting all the time because people who had their fingers in very important bases and tentacles have died or are dying now, and the obituaries tell you more than we would ever know if they were alive. Now, the lead of the story is James Bernard McNally, 65, aided Admiral Byrd expedition to the South Pole. And this is April 17th, 1982, the San Jose Mercury. He was a soldier in World War II. He was in combat. He was in the Korean War. He went down to the Antarctic area in 1955-56 with Operation Deep Freeze. He helped with the icebreaker, the USS Edison, and they helped build bases with Admiral Byrd in the Navy's first expedition into the South Pole. The first expedition was the hot one, 1946-47, when World War I was over, right? And Admiral Byrd was complaining about the defenses and the Nazis in World War II. Okay, he was down there, and then he came back, and he was assigned to Moffett Field Air Force Base in 1959, where he did electronic maintenance on the F-105 fighter jets stationed in the USS Lexington aircraft carrier. Now, in 1960, he retired from the Navy and worked as an engineer for Philco Ford in Palo Alto. Now, Philco Ford is the place around that exact time when Otto von Bolschwing, the #1 Nazi in America, the head of Hitler's Gehlen operation, who arranged all the interconnections of the Nazis in this country back to Germany and down to Argentina, Otto von Bolschwing, the granddaddy of ideas behind Adolf Eichmann, living in Sunnyvale, working for Stanford Technology, worked for Philco Ford also when he was in Palo Alto. He was linked to John Paul Getty, and he also worked for Philco Ford. Now later, James Bernard McNally worked for ISS Sperry Univac in Santa Clara, and then was a quality assurance engineer for the General Electric, Calma Electric. With GE, he starred in television commercials, kind of like Ronald Reagan, I guess, that were featured nationwide. And he also worked for a communications system out of Palo Alto for the Iranian government. Now, Otto von Bolschwing and Frank Turpel and Edwin Wilson and the entire CIA operation that have their headquarters and their funding going down from Newnham Bank in Australia and into Iran with the Shah of Iran and the communications and their Swiss dummy front organizations and their Nazi tentacles to South America, the Odessa network link. They were set up that network satellite communications in Iran. So this fellow goes from World War II with Admiral Byrd's trip down to Antarctica, later down with the icebreaker in 55-56. He works for Philco Ford, which is the Otto von Bolschwing connections, the international connections, Iran with the Frank Turpel and Edwin Wilson connections, and Turpel also worked with von Bolschwing. That's how we hit upon this guy, how Pete Carey found him, the San Jose Mercury, when I called him and said, check out Frank Turpel in California, and he came up with the name Otto von Bolschwing. And then he worked for television nationwide, and he also posed in advertisements for Fortune magazine, which were the Henry Luce connections. So that's quite an interesting bio on a guy who he spanned a lot of years. He touched all the bases, And he's 65 years old, and he died last week. Didn't say what he died of cancer. Well, we'll give him, whether it's a Martha Mitchell cancer or Jack Ruby or what, or just a coincidental. But anyway, that was his demise, his obituary, and he covers these very important interlocking bases. Now, in the last 10, 14 minutes, I'll run down some very important articles in the news that I can't possibly detail, but I want you to lose sight of them. The first is a fantastic story that I'll have to do 15 or 20 minutes on next week. The lead article is Late Councilman Linked to Weapons Plot. It has to do with a Fred Maggiore, Maggiora, up in Oakland, California, who was 29 years on the city council, a conservative pushing law and order. Well, he died in 1979, just as Cardinal Cody died this weekend. Both of them were under investigations for huge frauds, and this fellow was under investigations for gun trafficking and connections to organized crime. Now, his links go to Meyer Lansky in Florida, Frank Sturgis, to Mitchell Werbel, who supplies these weapons for assassinations and coups. He worked with agent provocateurs, weapons suppliers, and attorneys in Florida. Meyer Lansky, he's got a who's who of Watergate, and it's an interesting article because not only does it go through Watergate and the major assassination teams that have been doing murders in this country, and prominently in the John Kennedy assassination, but then he also worked with a fellow that the FBI used later in the Ab scam. The Sheik was actually part of the operation that he was into, too, so that the Ab scam Sheik that was used to get Senator Williams and other members of Congress out of office was connected to the Watergaters, and this is the first article I've seen connecting the Ab scam to Watergate. There are many connections, but this is one that's very important. And Oakland is the area. I could see why when he was being investigated in 1969, this guy probably had to be offed by 1979, because Oakland is the area where Edwin Meese came from, who was working for Ronald Reagan at the time, where Lowell Jensen works from, who's the deputy DA in Washington, D.C., investigating, in quotes, the Turple Wilson case, the wolf, guarding the chicken house. This was the place of the Hells Angels, the People's Park, Raymond Procunier, and the prison violences. He was the prison chief who's now been sent to Virginia. We'll do more on him soon. The home of the SLA, the Altamont episode with the Hells Angels, and the filming and killing of a person to link it to the hippie movement that literally ended the rock concerts as they were after Woodstock, the Altamont. This was an area in Oakland, a nest of the Ronald Reagan agent provocateurs, the police state killers, the kidnappers, the counterintelligence, the Operation Chaos, the messiest, dirtiest, and now this, and always Law and Order, John Mitchell and Richard Nixon, all these people, Mardian and all, Law and Order, right, Agnew, Law and Order, the hippies are terrible, the kids are awful. And these scumbags are with Meyer Lansky, Frank Sturgis, the gaming tables from Cuba, the syndicates, the narcotics dealers, the gun runners, the assassins. That is Mr. Maggiore. I'll come into details for you later on that. Bobby Inman, I want you to get an article, Playboy magazine this month, May 1982, has an article, The Smartest Spy. I'll do more on Inman. He retired this week. I don't think he retired because he doesn't like Casey. These guys are snakes living in the same pits for so long they wouldn't know how to dislike each other. I think he retired because the House Intelligence Committee is investigating at length the story of Edwin Wilson, Frank Turple, George Kurkula, and the deadly gang of assassins and dirty tricks supplying Gaddafi, the PLO, Idi Amin, Carlos, and so forth. I think he got out because he's too intelligent. He's the smartest guy in the service. He's the admiral that never got his foot in water. He's the brain behind a lot of this dirty stuff. And so he's getting out because the entire Nugan hand trickery assassination team was his baby. And they talk in this article about Task Force 157, and they go on to say that the Task Force 157 was involved in about every dirty trick from 1968 to 1975, and that's a lot of dirty tricks. That takes you from John Kennedy, from Robert Kennedy, rather than Martin Luther King, and a whole slew of deaths and murders, and it mentions Allende. And as I say, these interconnecting counterintelligence operations have a head and a tail and a body, and Bobby Inman was certainly a big head of this thing, and he's too smart now to stay in it. He's going to get out. The ship is sinking It's a mini sync with the in-house intelligence committee going into these people, but Kevin McCullough, he started blowing the whistle in 1975 on the operations of the CIA, and Frank Turple says they're still doing them today. So Bobby's getting out while he can, and he'll let somebody else take over. And as I say, who's taking over? The Senate has to approve of Mr. McMahon, M-C-M-A-H-O-N, John McMahon. But if they approve of him, they'll be approving of the counterintelligence covert agent, a career officer, worked in the CIA in every part of it, the technical projects, the administration, the deputy director of operations in charge of clandestine, which has to do then with the heroin dealing and the cocaine and the assassination teams and so forth. Another good article in Penthouse this month that I'll do more on, and for those of you that don't want to buy or support those magazines or can't get them, it's on the American Cancer Society. This is May 82, and how Elmer Bobst, the godfather of Richard Nixon, the head of a huge chemical company, the fellow who gave the dummy front to Otto von Bolschwing, that notorious Nazi from Sunnyvale, Elmer Bobst, and various multinational corporations took over the American Cancer Society and politicized it, pushing out the doctors and scientists, and it goes into the hanky-panky of how these various people take over, whether it's a disease like cancer or many other charities like the Red Cross or Boy Scouts. They get infiltrated with agents that bring their rottenness to them, and then the agencies collect funds with the legend of what they were when they first began, just as the Peace Corps. John Kennedy began that, and then it was infiltrated with CIA agents, and then it begins to lose its meaning, and people mistrust it. The American Cancer Society was taken over by these people. It's in the May Playboy 1982. Now, the covert action has a marvelous issue. I don't know how many of you take it, but if you don't take it, I'll give you the address. It's P.O. Box 50272, Washington, D.C. 20004. Covert action, filled with good information. It's $250 for the issue. If the address went too fast, call me and I'll give it to you. Send them $250 just for one issue and subscribe. They have a section this month on the Seychelles invasion. That involves trying to take over that island with a CIA agent who worked with Richard Allen in the Portugal operations and with our CIA. The war in Angola, which also involves Jonestown, the Richard Mellon scaves, and the struggle for the control of Angola as a base. The Mozambique rebels, Argentina's death squads, Green Beret torture, the white paper on El Salvador, CIA media operations, the Klan coup attempt in Dominica that has to do with John Connolly's name that was hushed up, a major investor who was murdered, the Nazis from Canada, the Klan in this country uniting, trying to take Dominica for a place for printing swastikas, Nazi flags, drug, narcotic sales, and suggestion that it be a home base for Robert Fesco, who's floating around. And then they have a section on the Nugenhan Bank, 5 pages on the CIA bank. So this one issue has areas that I have briefly covered, some at length, on the Nugenhan, the Dominica, the Seychelles, the Argentine death squads, Angola, and the El Salvadorian paper and the Green Berets. It's a marvelous issue. It's the covert action, again, P.O. Box 50272, Washington, D.C. 20004. Now, I will take each one of these chapters or sections and analyze it in context with its own other related articles, but in the meantime, it would be nice for you to get that. And if any of you saw NBC News this week, it was last Monday. I had just finished my broadcast here at KLRB on Sunday. Our NBC News comes at Channel 4 at 5:30, and I was watching it here in Carmel. And there on NBC were Germans in Germany and pictures of atomic weapon plants that were dismantled in Germany when World War II was over and reproduced down in Argentina. And they said on NBC News that a Walter Schnurr, S-C-H-N-U-R-R, a leading German scientist, fled to South America in 1946, used false documents, and went down to Argentina. And the intent they had was to make it a second fatherland, to continue World War II, which was Admiral Byrd said they would do, and it make ready for World War III. And this article is about how Germany has sent enough material, raw material, and expertise to Argentina so the Germans will have the atomic bomb. They will be able to make 8 or of them, they have 20 tons of nuclear fuel or even 10 bombs a year by next year. Argentina will have that many bombs, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have them already when they're making this little provocation, if they might not pull out one of those or wait till Great Britain does something like that, and then they pull out their bombs. They've always refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as has South Africa, and America's been sending uranium down there. So the little chickens are going to come home to roost, and we're playing headbanger. We got our head between their legs. They're holding us by our ankles, and when is it going to fall? Who knows? Getting back to Cardinal Cody, we got about 2 more minutes. Cardinal Cody quits this planet Earth. He's gone. There's a good article about him, mentioning him in the Wall Street Journal, April the 20th, 1982. It's a story about Anthony Greeley, who writes these very successful books such as The Cardinal Sin, Thy Brother's Wife. He hates the way the Roman Catholic Church is going. He's had a battle with Cardinal Cody, and he calls him a madcap tyrant. He abuses his authority. He's manipulating people. As I say, Greeley wrote the book Cardinal Sins. And the Wall Street Journal has a good story about the $1 million in church funds that went to Cody's cousin, his kissing cousin, Helen Dolan Wilson, alleged step-cousin down in Florida. I think the money went more to the organized crime syndicate coming out of Chicago with Paul Masinkas, the Secretary of the Vatican, and the St. Michael Sindona money and the Carlo Gambino. I think Cody was a front from Chicago down to Florida for the narcotics traffic, and the money taken out of the church was maybe for blackmail or payment for allowing a lot of the hanky-panky that went on between the Vatican and Chicago to continue, and that was his payment. He got caught in the scandal, and then as soon as he got caught, he had 4 or 5 heart attacks, and then he decided to leave, and he croaked last night, and I guess nobody in Chicago is going to worry too much about that one. He's going to save a lot of embarrassment. And speaking about embarrassment, a final thing, little Barbara Walters, she always picks the greatest people to interview. She had Klaus von Bulow on this week, and she asked him about his grieving for his wife who's still in the coma, and he comes out so clean. Well, we want to read about von Bulow. The New York Post, April 2nd, 1982, talks about his role with the Profumo affair in Great Britain. That was a scandalous Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's administration. John Profumo was in the cabinet and had to resign, and a Dr. Stephen Ward, who was involved in that, died quickly. There's a suggestion that maybe von Bulow had a role in his demise at that time. And there's another article in Globe this week, April 27th, The Exotic Sex Life of von Bulow. And it tells about the whips and chains and the chambers of horror and the sins, all the instruments, sexual instruments, perversions and so forth, and von Bulow's role not only with Dr. Ward and the Profumo affair, but he was a very close friend of Lord Lucan, who vanished in 1974, the night that his child's governess was murdered. The story was that he thought his wife was coming and killed the woman. It turned out to be the governess, not the wife, and he fled to Australia. I believe that Lord Lucan is still alive, and I think he's a relative of Lady Di. If I'm not mistaken, I'll look that up. But this is on the exotic sex life. Now, his sad story was, I had to have a mistress because my wife wouldn't go to bed with me since 1972. He didn't tell Barbara Walters maybe his wife doesn't like the chains and the middle-aged tortures and the racks and the whips. Maybe she just wanted regular sex, and old kinky von Bulow has a whole closet full of tricks, and maybe she didn't like him very much. Well, anyway, that's it for tonight. We had so much to do and even more. But I'll have to cut it short now because this hour is up, and it is an hour later than usual. You take care of yourselves, and I'll be back next week with some more fun and games and the headbangers for all of us. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.
This is for all you headbangers out there.
KLRB.